Welcome to another episode of Discovering the Jewish Roots. I'm Dr. Rick Waj, and we're going to continue where we left off in our last session together, and that is with what many rabbis are calling the commentary of Moshe, or the commentary of Moses. It's markings that are individual, very, very interesting, that are placed within the Torah scrolls themselves. They are sometimes duplicated in other parts. Sometimes they're brand new and they only occur one time, but I think you're going to be fascinated as we continue this study. And we're going to start off with the enlarged Resh, which occurs in Shemot, that is the book of Exodus, chapter 34, starting in verse 14. And this is what it looks like. Very unique, right? The Resh is very enlarged, and you can see that it's almost as though it's bolded or highlighted, but it's very much emphasized. And this is what the surface text says in Exodus chapter 34, verse 14. It says, "For you shall not worship any other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God." Now, so important, right? Because we're monotheistics, whether we're Jews or we're Christians or Messianics, we are monotheistic. We believe that there is one God, and He alone should be the object of our worship. So this letter Resh, in the Hebrew word echar that occurs here, means the head of, or the chief person. The letter is made larger by Moses to help us understand that anything or anyone that is made larger, or the head over God, is then another God, small g, another God in our lives. Now this tittle here is connected to another tittle that we're going to find later on in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, which is the famous Shema passage, which you probably know, of course, is Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Now check it out, because the only difference between the Hebrew word for one, that God is one, echad, and the word for having some other God, echar, is the Hebrew letter dalet versus the Hebrew letter resh, which for us in English would be the difference between a D versus an R. But if you'll notice, there's very little difference between the Hebrew resh and the Hebrew dalet. So Moshe wants to make sure that we know, look, we're to only worship the one true God, and we're to resist ever worshiping any other gods in our life. So he puts this big, bold Resh, big R, right here. It's this letter, he's saying, not the other letter. So don't worship any other God. Why? Because our God is a jealous God. Okay, moving on. We're going to look now at the small aleph, which occurs in the Hebrew scroll in Leviticus 1:1. And this is what it looks like. You can see that the aleph is minuscule compared to the rest of the letters in the Torah scroll. And this is what the surface text reads in Leviticus 1:1. It says, "Then the Lord called to Moshe." Now notice, called is underlined because that's the term that we're looking at. "Then the Lord called to Moshe, and he spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying," and then the text goes on. Well, the word we're looking at is Vayikra, and it's part of this personal marking system that Moshe has. But I want you also to notice that it's the Hebrew name for this book, this portion within the scroll, Leviticus. It means to call, Vayikra, to call. The book of Leviticus is all about calling. So the letter highlighted here that is shrunk down is the Aleph, which means strength. In Paleo-Hebrew, we see it. It's originally the picture of an ox, and Frank Seacon is to be thanked for these wonderful morphing letters that we see from Paleo-Hebrew all the way up to modern Hebrew and block language. But it's a picture of an ox. It's the strongest animal that was used at that time period. And so when God is represented to the ancient peoples, he's represented by this strongest animal that man would use when man doesn't have the strength. The animal does to work alongside of him. But there's also something else going on here, because this small aleph that we have in our text it's small, so it's not emphasizing the strength of the ox as much as it's emphasizing something that has no strength, or the strength is removed. So really, I think Moshe is saying that when God calls to a man, the man's strength has to be made small. So this calling involves not having strength. Now, isn't that interesting? We think, well, God only uses those that are strong in character and strong in ability and strong in talents, and that is just not true. In fact, when you look at the people that God has used within the text of the Bible from both testaments, you can see that he chooses to use the person that doesn't have the strength. He's the one who provides the strength. And Yohanan the Immerser, we call him John the Baptist, he said it like this. He said, I must be made weak so that he can be made strong, or I should be inferior so he could be substantial. But there's also something else going on here. I want you to see this because this is just so good. The Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the Aleph Beit, with 21 letters that follow it, and it's often called the father of 21 children. But there's more. So remember how God's language, Hebrew, incorporates sounds and numbers and pictures, right? It's a picture language as well as being alphanumeric. Now, the Aleph is made up of 3 letters. It's made up of a Vav that is tilted diagonally. It's made up of 2 yods, a yod here on the bottom and a yod on the top. An Aleph really is 3 letters in one. But it's also significant of what it means in Hebrew numbers. Because remember that ancient Hebrew and modern Hebrew is phonetic, it's numeric, as well as pictorial. So it's all 3 of those. So an Aleph is really these 3 all combined into one. So numerically, a Vav is the number 6 in Hebrew, and a Yod is the number 10 in Hebrew, and there are 2 Yods. So the total for Aleph, numerically in Hebrew, of the 3 letters that make up 1 letter is 26. Now keep that in mind as we're doing this. Aleph is a designation for the name of God. It's used throughout much of rabbinical literature. But check this out as well. So when we're talking about the 4-letter designation for God, the Tetragrammaton, the holy, ineffable name of God, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, I want you to check this out because this is interesting, because Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh also has the numeric value of 26. Coincidence? Probably not. I think there's more than coincidence. The Bible is full of information that God has passed on to us that when we dig, we find, and what we find is this deep truth that affects who we see God as being, as well as who we see ourselves within God, the world around us, how we function, and all those things. So here's the question for you. Is the letter Aleph, the father in the beginning of the Hebrew Aleph Beit, telling us something very specific about Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the personal name of God? Now, Jewish believers in Yeshua, Jesus, believe, in fact, that it does. The Aleph is 3 in 1, and it equals the same numerical equivalent, as we said, as the personal name of God, indicating that God shows himself in plurality somehow. And And we would say, as many of us being Trinitarians, that it's 3 in 1, something along those lines. That God has conveyed himself, even though he's one, he's Echad. He's not another God, he's only one God, but he shows himself somehow as being the person of the Father, this one who comes to save the Son, and also this way of mediating between himself and the sinfulness of man, the Spirit that has created all things and hovered over the waters. And so there's something going on there. And we see that in the plurality even of the name of the Creator in Genesis, where it says his name is Elohim. And Elohim is plurality, it's plural. It means that El is plural, but yet El is one. And so this is, of course, the mystery. We're not going to get that all worked out within this episode, but it's something to start pondering through, that God is plurality. He's more than what we can condense him down to with saying that it's just God. It's like gods, but it's not monotheism. I mean, it's not polytheism, it's monotheism. It's only one God. God is only one. So the Aleph is a Vav with 2 Yods, and it's very interesting. But there's something more than that as well. And we'll finish off the section, and that is a Vav is a man, and Vav is 6, right? Well, man was made on what day? Man was made on the 6th day. And a Vav is used often in Paleo-Hebrew to represent man. 6 is man's number. Okay, moving on. A Yod means a hand. And here we have the father of the Hebrew alphabet represented as a man being held by 2 hands, one below, one above, one helping him with the material, the spiritual things in life, the physical things in life, the other helping him with the spiritual, the things from above in life. It's as though God holds man, his creation, within both of his hands. And that, to me, is amazing. And if this then is a representation of how God deals with mankind, I would say it's right on the money. How about you? That God holds us in his hand. That God is the one who is the father of all mankind. Whether we recognize that or not, he is still who he is. And now we're going to be moving on to the next, and that will be the small mem we find in Leviticus 6:9. It's Leviticus 6, verse 2 in our Hebrew Bibles. And this is what it looks like with a small mem in the very beginning of the word. And it says this in the surface text of Leviticus chapter 6, verse 9. It says, "Command Aaron and his sons, saying, this is the law of the burnt offering. It is the burnt offering because of the burning upon the altar all night unto the morning, and the fire of the altar shall be burning in it." Now, the word that we're going to be looking at is ma'okdah. Ma'okdah. And I want you to notice how the first letter mem is. It's this reduced mem. And this one is so exciting to me. I just love this, the way this works. The letter mem in Paleo-Hebrew originally meant waters. This section of scripture pertains to the law of burnt offering, and more specifically to the timing in which it is to remain on the altar. Now, what does it say in the text? It says it would be all night. Now, our letter mem, which means waters, is pretty interesting here because water and burnt offerings, they don't go well together. And this, of course, is the point that Moshe is making, I believe, because if what you offer to God is to be brought to him, and a burnt offering implies that which is then made pure, made holy, then you certainly don't want to put out the fire or impede the process of purification of what you've offered to God, do you? In other words, you don't want to put water on the fire of what God's doing in your life to purify you. So here we have a small mem. In other words, it's a reminder not to bring water to the table where you make a burnt offering before God. And this is what Shaul, Paul, I think, was referring to in Romans chapter 12, verse 9. He said, "Therefore I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. I love that. Now, this is really interesting because Rabbi Shaul wrote this while sacrifices were still going on. So think about that. He is seeing this take place all the time. And they're being offered. Burnt offerings are being offered every single day in the temple worship service because they understood exactly what Paul meant. Because I believe Paul understood exactly what Moshe meant. He's saying, don't try to stop or try to hamper what God is doing in your life. Don't jump on and then quickly jump off the altar. If you want God to purify you, then you've got to be patient and you've got to remain in the situation in which God has placed you so that He can purify your life. And friends, I know how hard that is. It is so hard to be patient in the midst of a burning situation in your life, an uncomfortable situation, a situation that's painful. Fire is painful to us. And yet, this is exactly what God is saying in this. So Shaul put the same thought this way to the Thessalonian believers. He said in 1 Thessalonians 5:19, he said, don't put out the Spirit's fire. Now, how much clearer could that be? Don't put it out. Allow the Spirit's fire to work in your life. Don't put it out. How would you put it out? By pouring water on it. And water often in Paleo Hebrew means is chaos. And we get into a chaotic situation in our lives when we're the ones taking charge instead of allowing God to do it. And friends, change takes time. It just does. I've spent so many years of my life with the monastic community, agreeing with their understanding that we must take the time to get to know God. And that I totally agree with. And you know what? Change takes time. It just does. We need to let God do what God's going to do to purify our lives, purify our thoughts, purify our motives, purify our actions, so that it will be used, our lives will be used solely for Him. And if it takes all night, then it takes all night. And if it takes all of our lives, then it takes all of our lives. It will, in fact, take time. So we're not to put water on the fire of what God is doing to purify us as willing sacrifices. Then how are we supposed to do this thing about being a living sacrifice? We know what not to do. Don't stop what God is doing. But what are we to do? Well, Rabbi Shaul was a skilled rabbi who was very, very practical. We see this all throughout his letters. Check this out. Okay, look at this. He tells us how to bring living sacrifices. Paul's next statement then tells us how to let God do His perfect work in our lives. So take a look at this. He says in Romans 12:1, starting in verse 2, he says, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. And I find it interesting because oftentimes today, people will say they know the will of God, but they're still conforming to the world. And according to what the good rabbi here is saying, that's not a possibility. You're not going to truly understand what God wants for your life as long as you're conforming to the world and as long as you're not transformed or allowing God to transform you. Now, I think it's very interesting the way that the translators translate this Aramaic text into, because remember, Paul says he's a Hebrew of Hebrews, which means I speak Aramaic, my parents spoke Aramaic. That technical term actually implies probably is even further down the line from his parents even spoke Aramaic. So these are Hebrews. So when this is translated into Greek, this is the way they understood the Aramaic text. Do not conform is a verb that implies it's ongoing. You're not to ongoing, you're to not conform every moment. You're not to conform. Don't conform. Don't conform. It's a command, by the way, but also it's not just in your own strength. It's like you're cooperating with someone else. Well, the text implies that it's God. So the not conforming to the things of the world is that we're participating with God in this action every moment. But he says, be transformed. That's another verb, another action term, and it's another imperative, it's another command. And he's saying, but ongoingly at the same time, allow God to transform you. That's the context. So we're to work with God in not conforming to the world, and we're to allow God to transform us. Those take place at the same time. And he does this by renewing our thinking, the way we view ourselves in this world, the way we view ourselves in our relationship with God. Then, here's the conclusion, here's the outcome. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. That again is another action term, and that's present tense, meaning it's ongoing, it's right now, present time, as you're not conforming and allowing God to work with you on that, to not conform. You're allowing God to do the transforming, which you can't do on your own anyways. You couldn't do it if you had to. And at the same time that's taking place, it's an active verb, which means you're not doing anything. You're not doing a thing here. The end result of that is God is putting within you the ability to approve and understand his will. He does it. It's his work. Now that's a lot. That's a mouthful, I know. But that really paints the picture of what's going on in our lives. You see, our job is pretty simple. We're to work with God and just saying, God, I don't want to be like the world. So would you do that work in me? He does the work. It's not through our Bible studies. It's not through, he does the work. And then in that process, we're able to understand what his will is. I love that. I love that. So here's the question I have. Have you placed yourself on the altar of God, or have you placed water on your personal altar to God? Have you done that? This place where you stand before God, are you impeding what he's doing in your life? Are you stopping the work that he's doing in your life? Or are you allowing God to do his work in your life? That's the question, friends. Because we can say that we know God, we can say that we're following God, but if we still look, sound, and act like the world, then something is wrong with our theology, and something is definitely wrong with our relationship. We have to follow him with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and we can't stop the work of purification that God is doing in our lives. Okay, let's move on now to the next one, which is the elongated vav, which we find in Leviticus chapter 11, verse 42. And this one I think is really funny because, in fact, it's not actually a tittle that Moshe puts into the text. This is what the text says. It says, whatever crawls on its belly and whatever walks on all fours, whatever has many feet, in respect to every swarming thing that swarms on the earth, you shall not eat them, for they are detestable. Now, the interesting thing is, like I said, this is not one of the jots or tittles of Moshe. It's a mark made by the scribes purposefully to indicate the very center of the Torah text. That means on either side of this vav, on either side, there are 152,402 letters of the Torah. Remember now, the Torah is 304,805 letters. Exactly. It has to be, or something's wrong, and they have to destroy the text, and they have to reinsert pages within the scroll itself, or just start from scratch. But it's interesting to me, and this is where I think the humor of God really shows up, and that is that the very word for belly, being in the belly of the text, the very center, just happens to be in the very center belly of the Torah itself. The word belly in the very belly of the Torah. And I think that means that God has a great sense of humor, don't you? Okay, I want to go on to the next one and we'll finish this session. And that is the jots found in Numbers chapter 3, verse 39. And this is what it looks like, and this is what the text says. I want you to notice now the jots or dots right over that Hebrew word. And this is what the surface text says. It says, all the numbered men of the Levites, whom Moses and Aaron numbered, at the command of the Lord by their families, every male from a month old and upward were 22,000. Now the word with the dots in it is Va'aharon and Aaron. Scripture says that an average man lives 70 years. 70 years is, by the way, 22,000 days. Isn't that interesting? Well, the jots right above Aaron's name also flags attention really to the numbering process found in the text of the Levites. See, if you count the total number of the people given in the census, the total number is actually 22,300. However, the verse says the total is 22,000. Well, check it out because the jots are part of the answer. And Aaron. Aaron wasn't counted, nor were any of the other firstborn of Levi, which totaled the 22,000. The firstborn were, in fact, check this out, the firstborn were 300. So what does the firstborn have to do with Jacob's flock and family, the remnant of Israel, the redeemed of Yaakov, Jacob? They're all called firstborn in the Tanakh. So here are more dots as we're thinking about this. I want you to see how it lines up with this family that we're following through, that redemption will come through that family tree of Yaakov, of Jacob. And the main point to me is that God's math always lines up. God doesn't make a mistake, and the Torah itself does not contain any mistakes. The numbers all add up. And that tells me also that life matters and life adds up. Even though we've gone through the fires, we've gone through the flames, we've gone through good times and bad times, in the end, my friends, the numbers will all line up and we'll understand how God has made sense of our lives. Until next time, and discovering the Jewish roots, shalom, shalom.